Yeah.
Because today I'm working.
All right. Let me log into Canvas real fast, and then we'll get started, okay? And remember my Canvas password. Excuse me. All right. So as I mentioned just a couple seconds ago, today what we're going to be focusing on almost exclusively is understanding how to work inside of the graph editor. Now, this is a challenging work environment. It really is. But in, kind of all things animation, all roads lead to the graph editor. So it's an environment that we need to jump into as soon as we can inside of our learning process so that we can get command of it, so we can get comfortable in it. Because I know from experience that it's going to take you guys a good 2, 3, 4 weeks, depending on your skill level, to really understand and digest what the graph editor is showing us. Once you see the light, as they say, you can't live without the graph editor. Getting there, though, is a little bit of a challenge. Let's just real fast explore what we're going to be looking at in particular in the week 4 area of Canvas. As a small little reminder, I can see a couple of you guys wrapping up your MotoBot landing assignment. Get that done today, okay? Get it done, okay? Animation is a process that just takes some time, okay? So do yourself a favor and devote a couple, 2, 3 hours every single week to working and exploring the homework and the lab assignments that we do in class, okay? Trust me, you're selling yourself short if you try to cram this thing in 10 or 15 minutes, okay? Animation is an art form that requires some digestion and some work, okay? Some honest to goodness work. Okay. However, this week, we're going to be exploring 2 different things in particular. We'll talk about the details of this obstacle course assignment once we get to it. And note that I'm not giving you any examples this week because I don't want you guys to copy it. This happens all the time. I give you an example and then you copy the example. I want you to think outside the box. However, I've given you 2 important project files. And if you download those real fast, the obstacle course and the bouncy ball rig, you can start to see and maybe perhaps understand specifically what we're going to be working with. The obstacle course, once you look at the project, here it is. The obstacle course is, as one might imagine, just an obstacle course. Let's open up the project file and take a look at it. It's a playground. And your job is to animate our little ball traveling through and having just an awesome epic adventure inside of this obstacle course. Its path is unknown. Its camera blocking and movements are unknown. It's for you to create and to have fun with. Here we go. Good morning, Claudia. How are you? Good. Let me get you on the roll real fast. Okay. So if you look at the project file that I've given you, here it is. Here's your obstacle course. Pretty cool, huh? A whole bunch of little platforms. And you're going to be animating a ball, traveling, and going on a small little adventure inside of this obstacle course. Think of it like the X Games, okay? And how are we going to animate this ball going through this obstacle course? Where's the ball going to start? How is this ball going to begin its locomotion, its local movement, okay? And, what parts of the obstacle course is this ball going to interact with, and how fast, and when, right? So it's going to be a fun little challenge. In every sense, it's going to be the conclusion of our time here at this simple object level animation part before we go on to something logarithmically more complex, okay? To get us to a point where we can animate a ball traveling through this obstacle course compellingly, we need to spend some time looking at the graph editor, right? To help us out, we're going to be doing the historic bouncing ball exercise for our lab this week. And I've given you guys a really great rig. I didn't make this rig. The author of this rig is a guy named William Vaughn, and he just did a really great squash and stretch rig that he put out there for students to use. Here's the rig itself. It's incredibly simple. It's just basically 2 locators. This is, of course, going to stretch and squash your ball, which is kind of fun. And this one down here is going to allow you to move it, and then you can also rotate it as well. Okay. Now, if you don't like that little blinking thing on the inside, we can go and look at that, how we can get rid of that here in a minute. But that's the rig that we're going to use to be making our squash and stretch ball bounce across our little environment. Okay. yeah, it's a pretty simple rig, and really it's our first opportunity to look at how do we infuse some character. Okay. Okay, so we jump in. All right. To begin with, however, we're not going to be looking at either of these two projects. Here's what I want us to do. I want you to open up a brand new project file for a second and really take and just create a simple little sphere inside of that environment, because this is going to be our topic for the next little bit. Okay. Last week we spent some time talking about the dope sheet and creating motion paths, right? Real quickly, what is the focus and the purpose of the dope sheet? I like it. So it allows us to edit the location of our keyframes in the timeline, right? Let's put some keyframes down real fast so we have a point of reference. We go over into our Animate tab. Let's just do it real quick. Clean up some of my interface here real fast. There we go. All right. So there's my little guy. Come on in, Simon. How are you? Perhaps what I want to have here is that I want to have my ball traveling along the x-axis, pretty simply. Okay? So let's just do that real fast. I'm going to turn off the visibility of my camera and my lights just so I get a little bit cleaner workspace in here. There we go. I have all my position channels selected, so I'll just hit the S key to throw down a keyframe. And I think I'm just going to have this be a simple animation that takes 60 frames to go from the left to the right. I'll key all three of those channels as well. There we go. So there's our little simple animation. And let's reduce our timeline's visibility of our sequence here. We don't have to, so we can see it loop a little bit faster. There we go. All right, that's pretty good. So the dope sheet allows us, let's throw in a third keyframe in there real fast, just to give it a little bit more complexity. Maybe right around in here on frame 30, its position changes way up over here. Okay? Hit the S key real fast to key in all that information as well. So now it's going to move in this simple little arc. Okay? Talk to me about the dope sheet. Maybe I want to go and adjust the timing of all of this. Maybe I want to keep this movement, but the timing in which this movement takes place needs to be adjusted a little bit. Okay? So how am I going to do this? I don't need to change the keyframed values, right? I still want it to start and end in the exact same spot. And I still want it to go to that exact same middle point, just at a different time. How do I do this? And where do I go to make these changes? What's it called? Come on, wake up, everybody. It's the white rectangles, and specifically that's called the dope sheet, right? The dope sheet is our area inside of the animation interface to make changes to the location of our keyframes on the timelines, okay? So we're just changing the location of all these little white squares, okay? What you're seeing here in every sense is, the default animation window is the first line of the dope sheet, okay? Many folks, including myself, love to go in and just put our cursor right down here at the border in between the viewport and the dope sheet itself. So we get the double arrow. And now if you just drag up, we get a full expanded view of the dope sheet. Okay? And you can see very carefully, if you look down here, we're looking at the sphere. Here's the actual sphere item itself. When we expand it, here's all the position keyframes, the rotation keyframes. Okay, looks like we accidentally generated some keyframes on frame 30 for rotation and scale. So let me just right-click and do delete. Don't need those. Okay. And what's cool about this is that, once again, we can go in and get some real granular control over how all of this is working and where all these things are being flushed out. It's a really handy, quick way of adjusting the location of our keyframes on our timeline. That's its sole function. We're not changing what's captured inside of those keyframes. We're just changing where those keyframes are. Okay? This is our first opportunity for us to go in and very quickly establish the timing. Okay? The timing of our animation. And you'll see this in play once again once we start working inside of the bouncing ball lab assignment that we're going to do during lab today. Because in every sense, the first thing that we need to do is go in and establish the timing of our animation, how long the general movement's going to be. And then once we have command of that, and once we really understand it at its lowest quality level, we need to go in and make some pretty big wholesale changes inside the graph editor. Okay? Excuse me. So in every sense, if you've taken GCOM 400, this is something that we practice in GCOM 400 often, right? We go in and we initially draw all of our keyframes, right? We've kind of done that here. We've drawn our keyframes. We edit the location of those keyframes in time to really get a good sense of how long the movement's going to be. Maybe we can make some changes to adjust certain aspects, the speed of certain aspects of our animation. Okay, but then we need to go back in and really start tweaking all the in-betweens to get the actual result that we're after. Okay, now working inside the dope sheet's really easy, and we're pretty lucky we have such a good one because we just grab these bars and move them around anywhere we want to go. Now it's going to take a little bit longer for the computer to make it to that midpoint, right? Much longer, and then boop, eventually, and then it speeds up down there at the end. So it's a great way for us to adjust timing. Maybe we want it to reach that midpoint over here very, very fast. Well, we can just grab our keyframes, and then within the first half second or so, it hits that first mark, and then it slowly goes to its second. Okay? This is the purpose of the graph editor, for us to quickly make changes to our keyframes without having to go in and adjust their values. Okay? Oops, didn't mean to click off it. Many apologies. I'm going to put my keyframe right smack dab here in the middle again, bisecting the total animation of my little ball here. So we can start working with the graph editor. Okay? Actually, you know what I'm going to do, just to make it even a little bit easier to see the impact of the graph editor, I want to delete that center pair. So now really all it's doing is traveling from the left side or the right side of the screen to the left side of the screen. Okay? The graph editor is a tricky beast. Okay? It's the most powerful animation window inside of our entire interface. And FYI, this is not something that is limited or just exclusive to working inside of Modo. Graph editors are found in every animation package. They're edited the exact same way. We look at them the exact same way. So this is a skill set that you'll absolutely be able to take over to other apps like Houdini, like we were looking at right before class started today. Okay? Let's take a look at it. On the surface, it's going to be a scary, scary world. It is, trust me. But with some experience and some vision and some comfort, I think you'll be able to master the contents of the graph editor pretty quickly. Let's do it real fast. Let's open up our graph editor. I want to reduce my dope sheet back to its first row. And we can find our graph editor right here. Okay? So if we open up the bottom part of our animation interface, it's split into two tabs. Of course, we have the dope sheet. And this is a slightly different way of displaying the dope sheet. There's some other tools in here which makes it kind of fun. But most importantly for us, we have the graph editor. Okay? Now the graph editor's function, its purpose, is to take all of these keyframe values and fundamentally interpolate them. Okay? Because that's ultimately what we're doing inside the world of computer animation. We set a value, and then the computer interpolates between them. Okay? So, for example, if you think about it, if this is my first keyframe, so this is keyframe number 1, okay? And this is my second keyframe. Maybe the start position for my first keyframe along the x-axis is 10 meters, okay? That's a location. That's not a size. That's 10 meters away from the origin, right? And the second keyframe is on the other side of the x-axis, so maybe it's negative 10 meters, okay? Pop quiz, how far in meters is my little ball traveling in this animation? 20 meters, you got it. You got it, 20 meters, okay? Now the purpose of the computer and what it's fundamentally doing at a, on a root level is that it's automatically transitioning the x value between these two keyframes, okay? This is called interpolation. So maybe my first keyframe is at frame. I'm going to put F for frame 1, and then my second keyframe is on frame 60, right? So what it's doing in here is that it's figuring out how to cycle between this value and this value over this range of frames, okay? How to automatically change that number so that it, excuse me, drop the lid of my marker. Okay, so how to automatically cycle that number to move that value from 10 to negative 10 across 60 frames. It does the math, the calculations to figure out what the spacing of each one of those values is going to be along those 60 frames so that it evenly moves. That's all the computer's actually doing when it comes to computer animation. It's just moving numbers from one keyframe to another. And it's looking at the time it has to do within there to figure out how fast to cycle those numbers. That's called interpolation. Okay? What you're seeing here in the graph editor is a visualization of that interpolation. These little lines that you see popping up in the graph editor are called function curves. Okay? And they're the physical curves that are responsible for changing the values of the keyframed channels. Okay? So let's take a small tour here real fast to get comfortable. Over on the left-hand part of your graph editor, you're going to get the item that you have selected, and then all of the channels that that item has on it, right? So you're going to see everything, okay? So here's all the position, rotation, and scale channels. And then we have everything else, the visibility, the render. I mean, there's a lot of other channels that can be animated on an item that we don't necessarily work with every single moment of our day, okay? It's a bunch of stuff. So we're going to see everything over here. This is one of the areas that kind of turns into a little bit of a mess for beginners because there's just a ton of information in a very small environment. However, what's cool about this is that we can filter what we're seeing in the graph editor over here by a selection, okay? So if I just want to see my position X channel and its function curve, if I select it, there it is. Excuse me. And that's the physical function curve that's responsible for moving my little ball across the scene itself. Okay? As one might imagine, we're seeing a common convention between the UI elements. What do you think these big white rectangles represent? Keyframes, right? We get to move those keyframes, okay? Just like our dope sheet. Imagine once again we're seeing the first line of that item's dope sheet inside of here, so we can grab them, move them around. Okay, pretty cool. And then we also have these things up here, which are also a representation of a keyframe. Okay, so the white bar at the bottom and a white square on the graph itself are the keyframes. Now let's talk about the graph, because it is a graph editor, and a lot of folks get kind of confused as to what in the world they're looking at here, right? Now, in order to graph anything, we have to have two axes, right? So if you think about it, it's a graph. Okay? Now the ruler markers along both of these axes is important to understand. Now the horizontal one, this is the easy one, because it matches the timeline ruler tick marks that you see below. So this axis right here, this one, the horizontal, is what? Time. Yeah, frames, but let's just put time. It's a good general kind of descriptor. This is time. Okay? Now, where it gets kind of weird is that vertical, because look at all the units of measurement that you see over there on the far left-hand side of the graph. What do you see? Distance, right? Now, those are going to change depending on what we have selected. So what we see over here on the vertical side, all of this jazz, this is value. Okay? The value that's assigned to the channel that we're working with. Now, we're working with a position channel, so we're seeing position values. If I was to go in and select the rotation values, or the rotation channels, what value do you think it would show up in there? Degrees, yeah, absolutely. It wouldn't be meters. So this value field is going to change based on what we have selected. Keep that in mind, because that's going to be the organic part of our environment, that value field, okay? Luckily for us, the guys and gals down at the Foundry have given us some really good indications of what the frame and the values we're currently working with are. Okay? So if I park my playhead way back over here and select that keyframe, check it out. it tells me I'm on frame 0, and the value that's been assigned to that keyframe is 4.88 meters. Okay, that's the value that I physically keyframed and hit when I hit the S key. That was saved inside that little rectangle. If I zoom out, go to this last one way over here and select it, check it out. Here it is at frame 60, and we can see its value that's been preserved. Okay. The computer is going to draw the line in between those two keyframes. And as I mentioned before, that's called a function curve, an F curve, okay, which determines the speed in which the computer is going to transition between those two keyframes. I'm going to do something here real fast just to make it a little bit easier, right? Because this is the default speed. When you see a straight slope, a linear line without any curves or doodads in it, what do you think is going to be, what do you think the representation of speed is? It's just going to move, and it's going to be consistent. It's going to be linear. There's going to be no sort of weighted areas of the function curve that create a change in speed, a change in velocity, okay? So if we look at my animation now, check it out. Boop. It's just even. There are no fast or slow areas of that movement, right? It's just moving at the same speed throughout the entirety of its animation. Think of it like this. What we're plotting here is like the miles per hour of how fast my little ball is moving from the right to the left, okay? On frame 1, it's moving at its maximum speed, right? It doesn't ramp up. So imagine that the maximum speed here is like 100 miles an hour. On frame 1, it's going 100 miles an hour. Frame 2, it's 100 miles an hour. Frame 3, it's 100 miles an hour. It doesn't change its speed. It's always moving at the exact same miles per hour across the duration of its movement, right? This is a linear slope. So when you see a straight line between keyframes, you're going to have a pretty consistent sense of speed. But we don't like this, okay? We very rarely want to have a linear animation. Why? Yeah, I like it. It's unrealistic, it's boring, and it kind of throws away a really important principle of animation. Hey, Claudia, can I ask you a gigantic favor? Can you close the blinds that are right above you? I think it's the silver cord that actually closes it. Thank you so much. Now we don't get a glare coming across the screen. Thank you. Okay. So one of our important principles of animation defines that not everything starts at the exact same speed, right? There's a small easing effect that we ramp into our final speed, right? We slowly start, and then we slowly end all of our animations, right? Or all of our movements, okay? So what we're striving for is a function curve that fundamentally doesn't look like this, okay? Now, if yours has that curve in there still, and if you're following along, here's how I changed mine real quickly. If you grab both of your keyframes, I'm holding down the Shift key, by the way, to select them both. You can hit this button right here, okay? This button down here. These are going to change the slopes, and we'll talk about these in detail in a minute, but if you're following along, that one right there, okay? Okay. All right. So now I want to go in and start adjusting this. In the old school, like 2D animation world, how would we manually go in and create the illusion that my ball is slowly starting its motion and then slowly ending its motion? You got it, by adding more keyframes, right? And we pack the keyframes right around the start and the end pose, right? And we'd manually do it. If you've taken GCOM 400, or if you're taking GCOM 400 at the moment, you've probably have seen this, right? The illusion of speed is created by something that looks like this. So if we want the ball to start there and end over here, right? This is frame 1. But then frame 2 would be like right here. Then frame 3. Then frame 4, a little more spaced out. Frame 5. When all of our animation frames are packed in real close to each other, the distance that ball moves in between frames is very small, and the illusion that we create is of something that's very slow, that's slowly moving, right? Well, we want to do the exact same thing, but I don't want to have to go in and add a bazillion keyframes, right? Because our big mantra inside the world of computer animation is more keyframes, more problems, okay? We want to have as few keyframes as we possibly can, okay? Now, actually, I need to revise that statement. We want to have an appropriate amount of keyframes, okay? Sometimes you're going to need to have a lot of keyframes, or you're going to have to go in and make some big time adjustments, okay? However, we should try as much as we can to keyframe as few keyframes as we can, create as few keyframes as we possibly can. Excuse me. All right, so let's adjust our function curve here to get the result that we're after, because I want to have it slowly start and then slowly end, okay? To do that, it's really, really easy inside of Modo, right? Let me zoom in here a little bit so you can see. So here's the keyframe. If you look very carefully, right down there, there's a little gray square. Okay? That gray square is tied to a tangent handle. If you pull that gray square up and down, we can start adjusting the function curve. Okay? So when our function curves are perfectly straight and a diagonal in between the two keyframes, we're going to create a linear motion. However, once we start leveling them off and flattening our function curves, we're going to change our understanding of how fast this object's moving, okay? We're going to be slowing it down. Think about it for a second. When the slope is flat like this, we're not changing the value, right? I think it's 4 point some odd meters there at that keyframe, right? So it's holding that value, 4 meters, 4 meters, 4 meters, and then once it starts to go down the slope, then we're changing the computer's, or the computer's changing that number for us. It's starting to interpolate between those two keyframe values, okay? So when it's flat, we're hanging on to that number, right? We're slowly changing the interpolation, and then when it's real extreme, when the slope is pretty extreme, we're quickly changing that value. Okay, let's do it real fast. Now watch what happens now to my animation. See how it slowly starts? Here, I have maybe a different way of visualizing this for you guys. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to duplicate this entire object, okay? And on frame 1, or I'm just going to change its location, okay? So what is that on, oops, forgot to go in. Copy that keyframe, frame 60. Hello, there they are. Wrong app. Okay. So now I have, yep, wonderful. Now I have my two spheres moving together in harmony to get what I want. Wonderful. Okay, great. I'll leave it right there. So the back one is going to be the one I'm not going to touch. That's the back sphere is the one that has that linear movement, right? Slow and consistent. But let's start going in and playing with that front one and changing the keyframe's interpolation to change the speed of movement, okay? As I mentioned before, if we just go into our function curve, select a keyframe, that little gray handle allows us to very quickly make some big changes. We're now making a slope. When the slope is flat or very shallow, we get a slow change in value coming out of that keyframe. And then it's going to go down into that one. Let's look at it now. Interesting, huh? Interesting. Pretty cool. If you compare the speed of the movement between the balls, the foreground one slowly starts, then catches up, and then they end at the exact same time, okay? The duration of the movement's still the same, right? They're both still going to start on frame 1, and they're both going to end their movements on frame 60. It's all that stuff in between that we're really trying to edit and change, right? We're changing how fast the computer is cycling between these values in between keyframes. So with that said, let's do something fun here. Let's stop it for a second. And I'm going to go on to that bottom keyframe and do the exact same thing. I'm going to flatten it out, make this lovely little curve. And now check it out. Slowly starts and then slowly ends. Okay? This is called easing. Okay? We're changing the curve, our function curve, to create this effect for us, right? When we start to start to flatten out the curve, we slow down the motion. Okay? Now we could really push this if we'd like. And let's do this. Let's really push it. I'm going to go back and grab that tangent handle and really pull it out. To really look at the size of that hill now. It's very flat up here at the top, and then it slowly starts to roll down. I'll do the same thing for this guy down over here. Check out that. Now what do you think we're going to get? With a function curve that looks like that, what do you think this is going to look like? Let me zoom in so the folks in the back can see. Say again? Huh? Where is it going to be faster? Yeah, in the middle it's going to be much faster, right? Because we've changed the slope, right? When the slope goes more vertical, now we're going pretty fast, okay? And where the slope is real shallow and really kind of soft, we're going to be moving slowly, okay? So if you look at what I've crafted here, the beginning and the end of my animation is going to be very, very slow, but the middle has to accommodate, right? The speed of the movement that's happening in between these two areas skyrockets, okay? And both spheres end at the exact same spot at the exact same time, okay? But what happens in between is very different. All right, questions on this so far? Kind of getting it? Now, these little tangent handles can be fun to play around with, and I encourage you guys to experiment and to explore. But remember here, what we're plotting along this line is a value, okay? For me, this is the position of my ball along the x-axis. Now, I've done some changing to my function curve here, but if you look very carefully, that line or this tangent handle is pretty flat, okay? What would happen, you think, if I pulled it up? Now look at the function curve. The curve goes higher in value than what we initially keyframed. This right here, where the curve extends above or below, for that matter, what we initially keyframed, this is called an overshoot, okay? And watch what happens to my animation now. It goes back, and then it goes forward, right? Because remember, this is a value here. This is 4.2 meters, right? So at this part of the curve is actually going positively on the x-axis before it starts going negatively on the x-axis, okay? So we got to watch for these overshoots. Sometimes these overshoots are really great to have. They're really nice to have at certain moments. In every sense, we've almost got a free little anticipatory movement here. Sometimes overshoots can pay big dividends. Yeah, we can really overshoot it. Now watch what happens if we undershoot it. If we undershoot it, it takes off from its keyframe like a lightning bolt. Okay? Instead of slowly starting its movement, we've pumped it up full of adrenaline, and it explodes off the starting line with so much energy that it almost looks like it's coming at a light speed or something, you know? All right. Let's create a more complex example here, now that we're beginning to get a little bit more comfort working inside the graph editor. Okay? Let's throw in a third keyframe into the mix and see how this all changes, how this changes everything. And I'm going to get rid of that secondary sphere. Goodbye, background sphere. And let's flatten some things out. There's some really great some really great shortcuts that allows us to work with our tangent handles on this side, okay? If you look at them, there's some really important ones in here. There's auto flat, which is going to do something very similar. In an environment where there's a third keyframe, there's some differences between there. This one right here is going to create a linear interpolation, okay? Meaning, check it out, ultimately when you linearly interpolate something, you still get this tangent handle, but look where it points. That tangent handle is now pointing towards that next keyframe. If I was to change that one to linear, whoop, its tangent handle is now pointing to the previous keyframe. Okay? And then this last one, we'll talk about this last one here in a minute. It's called stepped. You really won't see the impact of this until you add a third or fourth keyframe into your movement. But this is a real handy-dandy way of getting everything back. I do this all the time, where I just grab my keyframes and I just flatten them out. Okay. Nice, smooth animation. Okay, let's add that third keyframe into the mix again. Right here on frame 30 or so. And let's do this. Yeah, let's have my little sphere here. There we go. Awesome. So I'm looking at my scene from the front just to make it a little bit easier to understand what this next bit is going to do. Okay? So what we're going to do now is that we're going to change the height of my keyframe, okay? Or of my of my animation, okay? And so they're both, the first frame and the last frame have a height value of 0 that's been keyframed and locked in. But let's bisect our timeline right around here in 30 and change the height of my little ball. Something like that. Okay. And now what happens is we get this. That's cool, right? Awesome sauce. Let's go in and start messing around with our Y channel. Okay. So we're not going to work with position X. We're just going to work with position Y. Now, position Y is exclusively and fundamentally focused on moving it up and down, right? The X channel is responsible for moving it left and right. So ultimately, the only thing that we're doing right now is changing when and how it moves up and down, okay? We have three keyframes in here, which gives us a great opportunity to talk about the function and the role of the incoming and outgoing slopes, okay? Because when you're working with two keyframes, adjusting your graph editor is seemingly very, very simple. But when you work in an environment that has more than two keyframes, which is basically every single animation on the face of the planet, right? You never just have two. It becomes a little bit more of a challenge to really understand exactly what's going on, okay? Now, here's the example that I like to use. It works for my little simple brain. And I'll turn the lights on so we can check it out real fast. All right, so imagine, if you will, that these little function curves are railroad tracks, and the keyframes are train stations on that railroad track, okay? So here we have station A. You know what, here, I'll replicate the actual function curve just for clarity. So here's station A. Here's station B, okay? Keyframe. And then here's station C, okay? And the function curve between them is like a railroad track, okay? Now, when we're working in an environment that has more than 3 keyframes, the function curve is split. It's split in half, right in the middle. Okay? And the computer now has 2 sides that it's trying to manage. Okay? It has the outside, so imagine, okay, so the train goes out of station A, and then it goes into station B, right? And then it goes out of station B and into station C, okay? Out, in. So we have the outside slope of the function curve, and then we have the inside slope, okay? So we have the outside and the inside, okay? Following that pattern, let's divide it in half. This is out. What's this? In. Okay, good. So this is out, and then this side is in, okay? We want to be able to control, or the computer allows us to control the curve on the outside and on the inside independently, okay? Which is great, because now we can customize how our computer is going to work with this, okay? It's really, really easy to do this inside of Modo. Let me turn the lights off. We can take a look at what this looks like in the actual graph editor itself. All right. So let's zoom in here for a second. Here's my graph. And I'm going to zoom out just so I can get this important part of our interface. So I'm looking at here, and then we also need all of this stuff too. Okay? So right now, if I go in and select that keyframe, you can see that I can change the slope, which is pretty great. FYI. And this is a very, very important kind of distinction here that we need to remember, because this is going to have an impact on what we do going forward. Changing the angle of this little handle is changing the slope, just the angle of it, okay? Changing the length, it's called changing the weight, okay? So we have slope, weight, okay? The angle is the slope value, the length is the weight value. Okay. When we're manually editing our function curves, we can go in and we can change both of them simultaneously, which is very cool. So I can flatten it out, I can change, let's flatten them out, and then I can change the slope pretty fantastic, or excuse me, the weight pretty, pretty fantastically. Okay. And FYI, here's a great, great keyboard shortcut. If you've zeroed in on the slope that you want, the angle, but then you want to change the weight of it, if you hold the control key down before you click on the tangent handle, it's going to lock the slope. That really, really, really makes editing things easy. Okay, remember that. Put that in your notes. Because sometimes we just want to change the weight of our function curve, but not the slope. Holding down the control key will allow us to do that. Okay. So now I can flatten out the slope, hold down the control key, left click and drag on the tangent handle and adjust the weight to fit. Now with a function curve like that, what do you think is going to happen here? It's going to slowly move up, and then as it gets to right around frame 26, 27, it's going to spike upwards. It's going to move upwards very fast. Let's check it out. Boop. Okay. Do the exact same thing over here. Change the slope. That's fun, isn't it? Okay. Or inversely, let's do this. Let's go back in and remove those changes. You can also go in, change the slope of that top keyframe. Now it's going to go up very fast and then down quickly. Okay. Excuse me. So what if we want to change, what if I want to change the slope of one side independently from the other? Because right now on that middle keyframe, they're linked, they're unified, okay? I want to break them so that maybe as the train goes from station A into station B, as it goes into station B, it does it real slowly, okay? But then it leaves very quickly from station B as if maybe the train's late and it's got to very quickly go to station C. Okay? Check this out. That's where this part of our interface comes in, and why I was emphasizing the importance of understanding the difference between slope and weight. Okay? Slope is the angle of the tangent handle. Weight is the length of that tangent handle. Okay? Now, if I want to change, if I want to be able to, kind of, if my tangent handles look like this, and I want to break them to make a V, which one of those two values do I need to go in and change? The slope, right? If I just want to go from here to pop it up like this, or vice versa, down like that, we need to break the slope, okay? And check it out. This is my least favorite part of the Moto interface. It drives me absolutely crazy, and if the Foundry developers are listening to my live stream, which they're probably not, they should fix this. But look how they've categorized this. So here's the slope category right here, which does nothing, by the way, which drives me absolutely bad. You click on the button, it doesn't actually collapse anything. But we get to change how we're going to do the incoming slope. It's all manual. Now I have, so it's, everything's manual at the moment, okay? But if we break them, check it out. Now I get to control both the outgoing and the incoming slopes, okay? See? Now their weight is still tied to each other, so the length of the handles is still going to be the same, but their slope now can be independently changed from each other. As one might imagine, if you wanted to unify them again, just hit the unify button and they're back together. So we get to break their tangency from each other and control the incoming and the outgoing slopes independently. You could even go in and say maybe, hey, so pop quiz, if I wanted to change this side of my curve, is that the incoming or the outgoing slope? This is the incoming, right? So it goes out of station A and then into station B, okay? The inside is always going to be on the left side of the keyframe. So if I wanted to kind of have it be a nice soft transition up into the keyframe here, I could go back over to my properties and say, hey, incoming slope, I want you to be flat. Whoop, see how it just flattens out the tangent handle, okay? And then the outgoing slope, I can do whatever I want. I can leave it as manual and customize it to my heart's content. Or I can say, hey, you're going to be linear out, and now that tangent handle is going to point towards that keyframe. Okay? We get a tremendous amount of control as to how our function, our graph editor, is going to be communicating all of our information. So now, slowly, okay, let's really push it. I'm going to hold that. What's the keyboard shortcut to preserve the slope but adjust the weight of our tangent handle? Yeah, if you hold down the control key, then left click and drag on it, it's going to keep the same slope but change the weight. There it is. That's kind of fun. Maybe I really wanted to slow down its transition to that final one. It's amazing how much extra kind of bonus movements we can craft quickly just by adjusting the function curves. We don't have to add more keyframes. We just need to edit the ones that are there. Okay? And the function curves allow us to do that pretty quickly. If you keep exploring the screen right part of your graph editor, you can see that we can also independently control the weight of the selected keyframe by going over here and adjusting all this jazz too. So if I really wanted, right now both of the weights are linked to each other. I change the weight of this of the incoming slope side. The outgoing slope side changes as well. At times we want to break those, and you absolutely can. So now we'll break the weight. You can change that independently, and now I can change that independently. Okay? We get a tremendous amount of power in here. If you mess everything up, which is likely, okay, just unify them. Just unify them. Okay? And then you can start crafting this again. Let's flatten them out, unify their weight, or just change their weight, and we're on our way. All right, and we're back to generally what we had before. Whee! Cool, huh? Very cool. Very cool. All right. Questions on this so far? All right. Let's throw this into practice a little bit here and start looking at how we can use the graph editor to go in and maybe start fleshing out a very simple bouncing ball. Okay. Now, I'm not going to use the rigged file that I've given you. We'll explore that here in a minute. We're going to just look at the process, and then you guys are going to apply this process to your lab assignment. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my little sphere here, and I'm going to get rid of some big chunks of keyframe data. So now my little bouncing ball is just kind of back over here. And I'm going to use the middle of the x-axis here, the middle of the y-axis as kind of my ground. So the big dark line that's showing up inside of my scene here is going to represent the ground. Okay? So let's do this. Let's just find a good happy spot for my bouncing ball to start its work. Maybe up there is pretty good. I already have a keyframe here on frame 1, but now I need to go in and figure out how to keyframe all the rest of this. Let's follow our process, okay? The practice of animation is important, okay? What's the first thing that I need to do? Crickets. Huh? Yes, absolutely. We're going to keyframe in the key storytelling moments of this animation, right? So what would be those key storytelling moments of this animation? What do you think? Yeah. In the air and on the ground, right? Think of it like this. If we were to only showcase to our audience these key storytelling moments, what is the fundamental poses that they need to see to understand this, right? In the air, impact on the ground, top of the next arc, because if they just see those animation frames, they'll kind of go, yeah, okay, I get it, right? It's kind of going up and down a little bit. It looks jerky and kind of low res, but at least I can understand and consume the movement. So let's define that real fast. Now, whenever I'm establishing the rough layout of my animation, here's exactly what I do. Okay, I'm going to close my this bottom panel here, and I'm going to just exclusively just look at what I'm going to create here. So I'll create, boom, boom. I'll create like just maybe 1, 2, 3, 3 or 4 bounces here. So let's just keyframe it in. Okay, I already have position values established for X, Y, and Z. Now I'm going to go forward 10 frames. Now this is something that I just drew arbitrarily, just 10 frames. Okay, every keyframe is initially going to be placed 10 frames apart from each other, with the idea that I'm just trying to capture the movement, and then I'll go back in and figure out the timing organically after the fact, right? Because when we're doing the timing, I want my creative brain just to be thinking about speed. I don't want it to be thinking about, okay, where in the XYZ is this located? How am I going to move it? Oh, I got to hit the W key, all that jazz. I just want to be focusing on speed at that phase of my animation. All right, so let's hit the W key. So I know I want it to be impacting the ground right in there. Okay, I'll go forward another 20 frames and say right there, that's pretty good. Another 20 frames, back on the ground. Another 20 frames, or 10 frames, excuse me, not 20. So on and so forth, and I'll do one final jump. Then maybe here, I don't know, it rolls or something, okay? Just real quick, let's just see what we have. There it is. There's my animation, okay? At this stage, the interpolation between all of these keyframes is confusing my brain a little bit. When everything is kind of flowy like this, where everything is moving along a curve, often we get confused as to the speed of the movement, right? Because the interpolation gives us a false read. The interpolation between these two keyframes, those function curves, are things that we're going to go in a future stage and adjust. I want to get some real solid information as to the actual timing of all of these keyframes. Thus, enter the graph editor. Let's do something here real fast. So here's all my keyframes. And FYI, if you hit the A key inside of your graph editor, it's going to auto-fit your function curve and all your keyframes into one space. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab all these keyframes, and I'm going to hit this bottom button, that one right there, which is going to apply these stepped curve type to each one of my keyframes. Now, what does this do? Well, let's check it out. Now, basically, what's happened here? Yeah, it's not actually interpolating. It's holding that keyframe value until the next keyframe pops up, and then it moves the ball, okay? This is a really handy-dandy workflow modifier to help us understand the timing of our animations, right? By changing the way the function curve interpolates the movement of our ball, I can focus on the timing. So I want to stop my animation, get rid of my graph editor, because oftentimes when you see the scrolling graph editor down here, you also get confused as to what in the world's going on. And now I'm just thinking about timing. How long is it going to take for this ball to go bong, bong, that first bounce? How long is it going to take just to drop? Whoop. I don't know. Let's figure it out, right? This is where the organic process of animation really bubbles to the surface. We've pushed the technology to the back, and now we're able to creatively understand our animations without all this other stuff getting in the way. We're just looking at the speed of the motion now, okay? With everything spaced out 10 frames apart from each other, we can see pretty quickly where we need to start making some changes. Now, I think for me, and do this one keyframe at a time, okay? How long is it going to take to fall? What seems realistic? Oop, oop. Let's figure that out. This first keyframe represents the impact of the first bounce. So let's move it. Let's just physically move it back a little bit. And now I'm just experimenting. That's good. I'm also going to change its value a little bit. Okay, good. So now, that took what, 7 frames to fall? Onk. Onk. So let's move this one back a little bit too. Okay, I like it. So between frame 7 and frame 17, so it took 10 frames to jump up, okay? So if it took another 10 frames to jump down, that'd be okay. Okay, it should start to move a little bit slower as it goes down the next jump, excuse me. So here's in frame 27. Here, let's make the math easier for ourselves. Let's have this next jump. This one took 10 frames. Let's have this one take, how long should it take, you think? Maybe 12 frames or 13 frames. So this should be, oh, it's already at frame 40. Good. However, it's downward slope right there. Okay. These over here, it's not traveling too far in this area, so we should actually probably push these keyframes up a little bit, compress them down. Cool, and then let's push this one out a little bit longer too. That's where I want it to roll. Okay, so I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. It's still a work in progress. There's some things, some tweaks in there that I need to do, but I've been able, walking through this process, I've been able to push the technology to the background and now just focus exclusively on how fast I want the ball to change, okay? How fast I want the ball to go through and make all these bounces. When we're seeing just the keyframes and we're not seeing the interpolation between them, often it's much easier to get a good read of how fast or slow you're moving between all of these keyframes, okay? With that in tow, let's go back over into our graph editor here real fast. I'll hit the A key to auto-fit all of my keyframes, and then just put all of my curves back to flat. Okay? Let's just see what we get. Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there. You know what would be really great is to get a really solid understanding of the motion path that my little ball is bouncing on. We went over this last week with our flying saucer. How do I add a motion path to my object here? Yeah. It really is that easy, right? There's a motion path button down here at the bottom. Let's add a motion path to the selected object. Okay. And now we can visualize pretty directly what this looks like. Okay. I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to return to my motion path options, and I'm going to edit my motion path. That way I can go in, grab these keyframes, and maybe change my arcs, because some of them are good, some of them are not so good. Okay. Awesome. If you left click and drag on them, oops, excuse me, I want the ones at the top. The ones at the top should be a little bit more, there we go, curved, right? So if you left click and drag on them, you can, oops, I missed it. Sometimes they're hard to get. There we go. We can start creating a lovely curve. Now for you, these curves may be there automatically. When I changed everything to stepped, it probably nuked all this stuff for me. Now we can create some lovely arcs, right? Because animation is all about arcs. Cool. However, it really doesn't have a compelling sense of motion yet, right? Because if you look very carefully, and we'll just do the first bounce, if you look very, very carefully, especially at on the position Y, yeah, it really doesn't, it slides a little bit on the ground, okay? Thus under the role of the function curve, okay? Now, as you edit around the graph editor, here's what you do, okay? If you want to zoom in on the graph editor, we're going to be holding down Option Shift and then dragging, or excuse me, Option Control and then dragging upwards. So we're going to use the exact same viewport navigation commands that we use in other areas to zoom in on our graph, okay? Then, of course, Option, just left mouse button will allow you to pan. So check it out. This is what I'm going to do on the keyframes that represent the bottom of my, oops, didn't mean to deselect it. Many apologies. So position Y, okay. So that one right there is the keyframe that represents the first bounce. I want to go in and make some changes here to how the function curve is interpreting its slope. If you look very carefully down here, we're getting something called ice skating, and it happens just with, it's a very subtle change. It happens within one frame. We can create a more direct illusion of a bounce if we grabbed our tangent handles and broke them, and broke their slopes, okay? And we're going to create a little bit of a point. Check it out. Yeah, now my function curve is coming to life a little bit, and I'll do the exact same thing over here. I'll break the tangent handles. Oops. There we go. I'm not going to do it on all of them, but now it kind of feels like it's bouncing a little bit more. Some adjustments in here on those middle points I think will be helpful as well. Let's break it. Start adjusting the slope. That one over here will break too. Adjust the slope. Yeah. Now we're starting to get something that looks kind of cool. Or cooler, let's put that. Now Now, one of the problems that we have in here is that on the first bounce, I would really love it to kind of maybe hover a little bit longer. So this is the cool thing about the graph editor is I can go in, I can flatten out that tangent handle, hold the control key to adjust the slope, okay? And now what's going to happen, it's going to kind of hover there for a second. It's fast, and it is subtle. There we go. Awesome. So this is how we go in and start flushing out and fine-tuning our animation using the function curve. It allows us to help transition speed. Okay? All right, I tell you what, since we've been going for about an hour and a half, let's just take a very small little break. We'll come back in and take a look at the rig and the obstacle course that we're going to be using for our lab and homework. All right, all right. So let's get back together real fast. And let's just take a second here and explore the squash and stretch rig that I've given you guys, okay? Because in our lab today, I want you guys to walk through this process that we just outlined and create a simple bouncing ball animation. Now, the goal of this project is to create an animation where it just bounces from one side of the screen to another. So we're not bouncing it in place, going from one side of the screen to the other side of the screen, as if it got like, you know, tipped off of a table and it's bouncing off the table, okay, going down the street, okay? So that's the mission here. It's got to bounce at least 4 times, okay? I'll let you figure out what the timing of that animation looks like. That's kind of your job today, is to get that fleshed out. Before we get started, however, let's just take a real quick second and look at the rig itself, because there are a couple moving parts on this rig that at the very least I want you guys to be aware of, okay? So here it is. It's a pretty simple rig. There's 2 basic control points, control surfaces that we're going to be working with, okay? As one might imagine, this top circle is going to allow us to squash the ball. This is always going to squash the ball towards that big circle on the bottom, okay? Keep that in mind. It's always going to squash it towards the circle, okay? In addition, that big circle is really the movement, is the placement node for our little ball in space, okay? So we move it up, we can move it down, we can also rotate this thing. The entire ball is going to move. However, this is one of the big challenges that we have in this rig, and with all rigs for that matter, right? Is that sometimes they're not engineered to do exactly what you want it to do, exactly how you want it to do it. So we got to look at other ways that we can get the result that we're after, because if we're trying to squash and stretch here, okay, the squash and stretch is always going to go down towards that circle, right? So if we want to rotate the ball, or if we want to have a slightly different effect in here, check it out. Let's explore the contents of our hierarchy. Because if you look at the contents of our rig, here's that top control locator, which is responsible for the actual squash and stretch. Okay. Then we got rotation control. That's interesting, isn't it? Okay, which isn't. Oops, we got to open it up. Let's see, which one is it? It's the locator itself. I didn't grab the right locator. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this rig is that it's not going to squash it globally along the XYZ axis. It's always going to be local. Okay. However, one of the things we can do, let me just go back and get it into place here. What would happen if we rotate the sphere? There we go. That's kind of interesting, because now we're still kind of getting the global squash and stretch that we're after. Okay. So when you're trying to rotate your sphere, we still want this global squash and stretch, right? Because the global squash and stretch is just trying to squash the shape of the ball. That's vertically. It's all its function is to do. So if you want to try to rotate your ball as it bounces down the street, go grab the actual sphere item itself in the hierarchy, okay? This guy, and animate its rotation channels to get the result that we're after, okay? This is a pretty simple rig, okay? It's a very simple rig, okay? Don't make it more complex than it needs to be. So if you want to rotate the ball, rotate it at the sphere level, not at any of these other locators, okay? Because those are going to mess things up for you pretty directly, okay? All right. Walk me through your process. How are we going to put all this stuff together? How are we going to put this together? What's the first thing creatively they should be focusing on? I like that. For this one, I think the camera blocking is important, so consider that, okay? Excuse me. What's the next thing after that?
Position of the starting point.
You got it. And
End point.
And so all the keyframes, right? All the you set up the keyframes first, and then we're going to go back in and establish the correct timing of those keyframes, okay? And then the graph editor will work. Now, there's one extra little bonus in this rig that hopefully you guys have begun to see and understand. Let me show you what it looks like. Okay, I'm just going to place my guy over here. And then I'll go forward, I don't know, 10 frames or so, and place it down over there. Okay. Now the cool thing about this rig is that it has a fantastic feature called onion skinning enabled for us. Okay. See that ghosting in there? It's kind of hard to see. That's the onion skinning. Okay. That's showing you what's happening or what has happened, the relative position of the ball in 3D space on the frames beforehand. This is a fantastic tool to use when trying to figure out your motions paths, okay? We're just trying to figure out the overall timing and placement of your three-dimensional shape inside of our 3D environment, okay? If you don't like to have this on, because it can kind of kill your performance a little bit and just visually get in the way, let me show you where to turn it off. It's part of the rig. In future weeks, we'll talk about how to create onion skinning. Not every single animations or not every single rig is going to have them enabled. We'll have to create them by generating what's called an actor and then a pose and a whole bunch of, we'll get to that in a couple weeks, okay? But if you want to, at the very least, turn it off if it's getting in the way, here's how you do it. You have to do it on a per viewport basis. So I'm going to put my cursor in the viewport, and it's right there. Enable onion skinning. Boop, and they go away, okay? So if you really don't like to see that stuff, or you just want to temporarily turn it off to get a better understanding of how it looks in your rig, just enable it at the viewport level, okay? And then you're on your way back to animating, okay? Another cool thing that I recommend that you do from time to time, and I do this all the time just for me, is to turn off the visibility of your wireframes. Because when you're animating, sometimes those wireframes just visually get in the way and we'll want to deactivate their visibility just to kind of clean up the interface and focus on the actual model itself. It's really, really easy to do this. And once again, we're going to return to our viewport properties to turn this stuff on. So I'll hit the O key. And where we're going to find it, and I got to select my mesh first, excuse me. Where we're going to find it is in the active meshes section of your viewport properties. And then specifically, we're going to turn the wireframe overlay from colored to none. Okay? Then, when you deselect it, bloop, there it is. They're off, which is kind of nice. Now, if you don't want to see your wireframes when you click on it, here's how you change that. Because sometimes you just want to see, your object. Once again, it's all viewport properties, right? Hit the O key. Excuse me. And where we're going is back to the drawing and control section. Selected item drawing. See how it says wireframes? Put it to filled. And now it's just going to slightly change the fill color. Almost kind of looks ghosted a little bit. Yeah, we're on our way. Another way that we can interact with these objects inside of our scene to make it a little bit easier for us to see and understand exactly what the computer is drawing for us. You know, these computers are tools, right? We got to keep in mind that we're in charge of the tool, okay? If it's hard for you to see what's going on, we'll change the tool's behavior and make it work for your brain, okay? Don't bang your head against the computer for an hour, you know? Make it work, fix it, change it. You're the operator here, okay? You know, the more we control the computer, the easier it is to create our artwork. Sound good? All right. So I'll tell you what, let's take the next hour or so and start rocking and rolling on our bouncing ball. Please keep in mind, you will be making a very simple render and submitting your Luxology project file to the Dropbox on Canvas once you're finished. Sound good? All right, let's get to work.